Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. The last time we gathered to talk about insulin and the crisis of affordability was on October 3rd. We called for House and Senate to come together to work out a compromise so that we could eventually call a special session and provide some relief to Minnesotans. I'm grateful that the call was answered. We've been now set a time, a self-imposed deadline of 30 days. That time has expired. I do believe that that some clarity around what the crisis is started to emerge out of those talks. I think as I reminisce, I've been carrying around this this gold-plated insulin vial that was given to me. If you recall, on the 3rd, Alexis and Katie, two young women, joined us. Alexis talked about her hopes and dreams for the future. She's a student at the University of Minnesota. She talked about her studies, what she hoped to do. She talked about travel, and she talked about over the last basically 18 months, those have been turned upside down as she was diagnosed with diabetes. She talked about her fear of turning 26. She talked about her constant worries of how she's going to access insulin. Katie talked about, although having insurance, still worrying about rationing, working 2 jobs. Her dream of opening a yoga studio on her own is on the back burner now because of the cost that she incurs. And so with that being the case, and we've reached that 30-day window, I'm going to make a change of tack and ask for them to do what we've asked from the beginning. Let's do these hearings out in the open. I understand that sometimes in delicate negotiations there's a need to maybe step back and see if you can compromise. We've tried for 30 days. My understanding is Friday that an offer was tendered but was not able to be accepted. So whether we made some progress, you maybe have to speak to the folks who are in that room, but not far enough to be able to have an agreement. And I think what's missing in this is the public eye. I think it's the eye of the folks in this room, in the media, being able to be there. And a hearing is very different than a negotiation. A hearing allows us to bring in advocates, to bring in experts, to hear different sides of the story. And I think what my concern is right now is that we've fallen over these 30 days a little bit into camps again, and it's time to break from that. There is no reason that this is an issue we cannot solve. There's no reason we can't deal with the emergency side of things for people who are uninsured and need it immediately, and the long-term costs, whether they be young or old, of how do we make sure that both the insured and the uninsured are getting access to insulin. And I think it sets up an opportunity for us to talk about drug pricing across the board, and it shows once again that we in Minnesota can solve these problems. So I'm going to ask them that immediately convene hearings. Call their witnesses, call their advocates, call the experts in. Let's do it on both sides again. Now, the House has gone through this exercise. That's how they came to craft their bill. The Senate bill was not crafted with a vote or questions, and I think it would be helpful to maybe find some of that middle ground if they went through the regular order of things to have the hearing done. So our intention is still to get this done before the holidays. Our intention is still to have a working compromise that works for Minnesotans. Our intention is to make sure that the affordability is there and the access is there and that barriers are brought down so that folks like Katie and Alexis can start dreaming about the future, can start thinking about the holidays, can start spending time with their families rather than figuring out how to do this. So I'm grateful you're all here. Our next step will be to hopefully get responses from the leaders. It seems hopeful because of the work that they've done. They continue to meet. They could continue to meet straight up till Friday. My concern was, though, there was no real formal response to that, and the clock just kind of ran out here on the 30 days. So with that, please, any questions?
Sir, who made the offer on Friday?
Yeah, my understanding is it was a compromise version of the House bill that took in some of the considerations that were in Senator Pratt's bill. It was given to the negotiators on the Republican side, and the way I understand it is just no positive response, and time just kind of ran out here.
Well, didn't they go back to a fee? I mean, didn't the Democratic offer go back to a fee as opposed to the Pratt proposal of using patient assistance programs, and isn't that going back to square one?
Yeah, I did not see in the negotiations that they gave. We have been there as providing assistance, whether it be MNsure or MDH. But I did not see where they're at. I do think it still hinges upon this, that there was a bit dug in, whether the manufacturers were going to have a role in this. I have stated clearly our position from the administration is they have to play a central role in this. And while I think it was a good faith effort on the Republicans' part, certainly if you were uninsured or some of the issues of going in to see your doctor, there was a lot of hurdles put in place that we think would have been a lot simpler. But with that being said, I don't think there was a compromise bill came back that moved off that position much.
Do you envision this being a joint hearing rather than just each side hearing their own proposal, saying their own proposal is the best one?
You know, as tempting as it is for me to tell the legislative branch how to do their business, I think that maybe makes sense. I do think there's some goodwill that came out of this. I think that the 30 days, the October 3rd call that we made in here did get things moving again. So yes, perhaps if that makes sense, but I really do think though that if you would air the proposals with a true hearing with testimony and from advocates, because the advocates are saying, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, the advocates have said they have not been consulted on the Republican version at all, that none of the insulin advocates have been consulted at all. It was written without them there. They did believe they were part of the House version. So I think if you did that, if they want to do joint, that does maybe make sense. Maybe we're further along and they can do that. I still think the problem we have, this is somewhat symptomatic of what many of you lamented on at the end of the session. I'm not even certain why this needs to be behind closed doors at all. I'm willing to give that 30 days where they were willing to work behind there. I was willing to stay out of that business, but I'm just not certain in this case, why not the bright lights of a hearing? And I think that hearing would force some compromises. That out in the open has a real therapeutic effect, I think, of softening some of the tough positions.
The holidays, I mean, Thanksgiving is next week. Are you talking about having a deal done and signed, a special legislative session, everything done, wrapped up by the holidays? And which holiday are you talking about?
Yeah, well, I think it's going to take them a little bit of time here. I would guess between the Thanksgiving holiday and as we move towards the end of the year would make sense. And I just, you know, this idea that I hope this is not the case, but it feels a bit like running out the clock till we get to the regular session, which is really difficult for me to get with because it's always the right time to do the right thing. We're still hearing from the advocates. They're fearful that we're going to lose the momentum. They're fearful that we're going to lose the sense of urgency, and that's why I think it would make sense. And it's not hard to call a hearing. It's not hard to get the folks who need to be there. Advocates are waiting, knocking down the door, physicians and others, to be a part of this. This is not all that difficult for us to get there.
You're talking about the hearing happening before the holidays, not the whole deal.
Yeah, I think we can come in the morning in a special session and finish this if they get this thing all done. I mean, they've been working 30 days on this. My goodness, we've been working since May where we thought we had a proposal. This doesn't need to be that hard. I'm talking getting this thing done by the first of the year, and I don't think that's that hard.
The silent player in this has been pharma. I think most.
Oh, they're not silent. You're just not seeing them. They're not silent.
In terms of a public venue.
Yes, that's correct.
Would you like to see them be out there at a public hearing, and would that make a difference as far as you're concerned to move this thing off square?
Yes, I would like to, and it's not about demonizing them. I've said this all along. These are important drugs that people need, and they have every right to make a profit. They don't have every right to, you know, usury to make an obscene profit or to shut people out on this. So yes, I'd like to see them come to the table. Their voice is certainly being heard behind those closed doors, and that's the part that troubles me because the advocates don't feel like there's plenty of ability for pharma to get their message in here. I'm trying to work hard to make sure we lift up those advocates and those end users of insulin to make sure they're being heard. So yeah, I think that's appropriate. Again, not for demonization, but come in and tell us why. Tell us why this is $600. Now, maybe there's a good reason. I'm just nervous, to be quite candid with all of you. What is the purpose behind the closed doors right now? Who's being protected in this and who's being served? And so the answer to that is absolutely, I'd like to see them at the table in an open hearing to be able to answer questions from all sides.
Governor, can I, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Members of the work group have expressed frustration that you are not at the table with them. Is that something you've considered? Do you feel like your presence has been there?
Well, that's patently false. My administration has been there the entire time to do whatever they needed. There have been cases where they have simply not asked them to. Our experts are at the table. I have been there every step of the way. I mean, that appears to be a bit ludicrous to me when they weren't even going to meet until I called them on October 3rd to be there. So I'm not going to get into a triumvirate situation again. We're pulled behind closed doors and they don't have to pull the mask off the people who are actually putting the bug in their ear. So I want this to be done in regular order. And the proper procedure of this is for the administration to have a position to work and be clear with that, which we have been, and to tell them where we'll compromise. And as this process comes out, they'll know. We've been there every bit of the way. What do they not need to know? So, yeah, I'm not buying that, and I'm not allowing them to set up a situation again where the legislature can't do their work, and I'm asked to come in at the end and then be demonized for trying to find deals that were worked out, because this is a very similar situation now. The end of the session came to an end, and it finally took some of that. I don't think that this is one of those that has to be done behind closed doors.
Governor, I just want to make sure I understand your position. Details of how the Pratt plan might be implemented aside, I recall that you were supportive, maybe not supportive, but very interested in looking at the Pratt proposal, which was to send requests to the drug companies, have them fill the requests for these hormones.
Certainly, I was certainly open to, and I don't want to denigrate where their plan was, and I was willing to say that I think that the Democratic plan that Representative Howard and Liebling and that they moved on, that they voted on, I think is a solid plan, and that's certainly, I think, the way I'd want to go. But that's not the way this works. I'm willing to compromise, and there may be the capacity, which I really liked about this working group, and I do think it did some of this. It expanded our vision beyond emergency triaging of insulin to long-term costs and sustainment. So I think those are things the public would like to hear about, that we could reach that compromise.
Bottom line, did the 30 days do anything, and by anything I mean move the two sides closer together, or was it just an opportunity to talk about things?
You mean for the 30 days, or for us to do this now?
No, the 30 days. So, in the last month, have people moved closer together, or was this working?
No, it's a good question. And I think the way I see it is I think it helped us all understand each side's position and clarity. Whether they got any closer, probably not, but I have to tell you, if there's no leverage of public interest in this, if it's behind closed doors and you're hearing secondhand, I think it becomes harder. I think that you would find a day of hearings with advocates and laying out the plans would be a wonderful thing to move folks towards compromise, because I think the public would see more of that and have more clarity. So I do think I certainly, it was better than where we were at. It was better than where we'd shut down. It was better than no one was doing anything. I'm glad they responded to that. I hope they now respond to this, because I think we've reached the end of what the closed door negotiations can get us, and now it's time to pull that forward.
Governor, you were on a slightly different topic. You were in Senator Cohen's corner as he was facing a challenge, and yesterday he announced he's not running again. He's the third long-time incumbent to say he's not running again in the face of a challenge. Is the old guard, is there a message out there for the old guard?
Well, I don't know. The first thing I would say is I want to thank Senator Cohen for years of service to the state. He was a steady hand. He's the first person, when I started talking about running for governor, who said, you need to understand budget tails before you even think about running for governor. And so I spent many, many hours understanding the budget with Senator Cohen. And I think it's always healthy when you've got new folks engaged in the democracy, you've got folks deciding to run. We've already got a great candidate running in that Senate district, and I think that's hopeful. I think my wife and I oftentimes talked about this, that effective schools, and the school analogy on this was, really effective schools had a really nice mix of new teachers, mid-career, and end of career. And we talked about this. When you're that new teacher, she was doing debate and speech, and I was doing football, basketball, track, the play, the prom. The new teachers, we didn't have kids, we were doing all that. I think in the legislature, there's a good analogy with that. Every functioning organization has that nice mix. So when I see new folks starting to come in, and folks who've had wonderful, distinguished careers start thinking about where their next phase is, that's healthy for the democracy.
Governor, what would be your advice for the newer legislators in terms of, we should have one more session with Senator Cohen. I assume there are some things they can learn from him.
would be my,
I'm just wondering what your advice would be to lawmakers that have not been here as long. in terms
oh
of-
yeah, no, that's good. And this was something I talked about this with Elijah Cummings, people like John Lewis and others that I tried to suck that up like a sponge. And on the U.S. House, you can set wherever you want. And I was setting by John Lewis my first year a lot because he was an icon. He understood this, but also legislators who got things done. So I think getting the opportunity to see that there's new ideas, there's new blood, but there's also institutional knowledge that makes the place work. And I worry if you get too much of, you don't need that. You don't need the way they get things done. These are folks that understood. Senator Cohen helped usher through many budgets, and that is easier said than done. So my advice would be is spend some time there. I had, as I said, the advantage of learning what I learned about the budget early on from the senator.
Was the Cohen backing that you had of him, was that a one-off, or should people expect you to be getting involved in these races to determine who the Democratic candidates will be in the next fall election?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm the best pundit. I watch these things and see it. I think that in this environment and the frustration people feel, I think especially geared at D.C., I think you're going to find people are trying to find ways that they get involved. For some of them, it's electoral office. For some of them, like Alexis and Katie, it's advocacy. I would not be surprised if you saw more of this because I just think there's more people involved. I'm out on these events, and I'm sure I can't speak to the Republican side as clearly, but certainly on the Democratic side, there is huge engagement and huge desire to get in. So that will probably continue to come, and I think legislators understand that's just part of it.
I'm sorry, my question wasn't clear. Are you going to be endorsing these?
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I'll wait till we go through. We won't be endorsing till the Democratic convention, and I just think it's one of the things to allow them. I've always said I stand with incumbents when they're in, but when these are competitive races, I'll just wait.
Well, Governor, Aaron Murphy isn't exactly a rookie. That seemed to be more of a left-middle conflict than a young-old conflict. Can you speak to that issue with the
Well, I can't speak to why someone's running. I still, I would leave it up to them why they're going there. I do think you just have a lot of activism and people want their voices heard. So I don't think it would be that unusual. I would guess there will be more primaries. My advice to the Republicans would be to have more of those too, because it looks to me like, as we're seeing both with my friend John Bell Edwards and, of course, Andy Beshear and what we saw in Virginia, there's a pretty upswell of folks wanting to see some things get done. So,
the former president said he's concerned that the Democratic Party is moving too quickly to the left and leaving a middle voter behind. Can you react to that?
yeah, well, I certainly respect President Obama and the work that he did. I had the privilege of working with him. I had the privilege of having the president sign into pieces of legislation that I wrote. I sometimes think this isn't an either-or situation. I know that people get tired of this, but I can't help but football season gets me into that. I never met anybody that I coached against that didn't want to win the state championship. I think it's okay to have lofty goals. What I think the president's getting at is you can set those lofty goals, but you better have guideposts and stepping, gates that you're crossing through to get to that. And I think what he's talking about is that just having the biggest, boldest vision isn't good enough alone. And he's not denigrating the big, bold vision. I think that's good to have, but how do we get there? So I think he's being a little more cautious that just outdoing somebody. We're going to win the state championship and we're going to do it without giving up a touchdown or whatever. That doesn't make you a better coach or your team any closer to getting it done. What you need to have is how you're going to move us. So if the idea here is every single American needs to have access to affordable, quality health care, show us how we're moving the needle in that direction. So I think it's good advice, but I don't think it's quite as easy as the too far left thing. I think it's trying to manage how do you get to a goal that all of us want to try and strive for.
Realizing that it's early, but have you given thought yet to special election dates for Representative Loeffler's seat?
No, but I do want to express my condolences to Diane's family. It's a loss. I know that bipartisanly, feeling sadness. I think many of us were surprised, a very private person. I think we will get together and talk about this. I think the good news is we're out of session. We have a February 11th gaveling in, so we've got a little bit of time to get this right. And we will obviously think about it to give the voters maximum opportunity to see the folks who are running and maximum opportunity to get their votes in. So we will start this week after we pay our respects and things to the representative.
Governor, on the latest round of DHS hearings, the Republicans, I think Senator Rosie said frustration repeatedly, deafening silence, I think was a term she used in terms of your response to this. She, I believe, is looking for more involvement on your part to be sure that this gets resolved.
Yeah, this is where I would hope the press would say this. I don't think you've seen me not stand in front and say that this is why I ran. I encourage this. We're the ones who are surfacing these issues. We're the ones who are asking for self-OLA investigations, providing everything we need to be there. I think you know the most recent one was a practice that had been going on over 20 years. I've already changed it to have 3/4. I don't know if, does the Senate think the governor needs to come to those hearings rather than providing my commissioner of administration and the CFO? I really hope that we're not getting into a point like we're seeing in Wisconsin, where the attack on the governor just because they can is there, because that is patently false, that we have been as engaged in this as possible. My folks are available on a moment's notice, and I will once again highlight that you have access to data practices whenever you require that, whenever you request. I would ask the same of the legislature. I would ask them to be helpful in solving this problem. So I just reject that flat out. I think many of you have seen that we are leaning in as much as possible, and I will reiterate it today. These are not the last of the issues that we're going to surface. Our goal is to put the plan in place to change the process, to work with the legislature to find a way that we can make this agency as effective and as efficient as possible.
When are you going to have the third-party person or firm come in to?
Yeah, we are in the process of that. Commissioner Harpstead, her 90 days that we asked, and they, I will remind folks, were really supportive, and the Senate GOP said give her 90 days, let her surface the issues, let her get a full understanding of this. This is a case of, I have now had 10 months to do this. We started surfacing these things as early as January, and we're trying to make sure that it's there. So I think as that 90 days comes right here in the next week or so, we are prepared to act decisively. We are be prepared to work in concert with the legislature, but I'm going to make sure I put the strong foot down now. The idea that I'm not being collaborative. These are senators that have been there for decades. They could have held these hearings when these things were happening decades ago. So there's enough of this that we're in this boat together, and we can do it together as long as we stay collaborative.
One more question. It's got to get to Brader. Excuse me.
Governor, how's Amy Klobuchar's campaign going, do you think?
Well, it's great to be in Iowa, except for the darn game. I will express my thanks and appreciation. The experience in Iowa amongst folks in Iowa was first class. They were gracious hosts. As I always say, it's always easy to be gracious when you're winning, but I think they would have been anyway. Campaign was good. We started a door knock. We were with a lot of folks down there, a lot of really high profile. I think the thing that's maybe missing at this point in time is the number of influence leaders who are endorsing Senator Klobuchar, some state senators we were with. They appear to feel fairly strong. And the word I got from folks on the ground, Iowa political types, was it's just beginning. So you can just let some of this drift off you. It's just beginning. The real push will go. So we were in the office in Cedar Rapids. We were in the office in Iowa City with supporters, and then of course down at the game there were an awful lot of folks. So, but I want to thank you all for being here, and I will echo my positive call. We can do this. We can do this. There is goodwill on both sides of the aisle. There is a strong desire to get this done. We're doing it just like we did in the session against a backdrop of the most dysfunctional federal government many of us have seen in our lifetime, and we're still doing this. So my call to legislators across the spectrum is you can show a little partisan frustration, but Minnesotans are counting on us to get this right. I've carried this around that the advocates have given to me. They mention that it's painted gold because it figuratively and literally is like gold to them. And I keep it with me to remind her that they're asking us to get this done, and these folks are not partisan. They just want us to figure this out. The solution is there, the compromise is there, the will to get it done is there, and all we need to do is push it over the line. So thank you all.